Hi, all. I think we can start now. Welcome to this first episode of the event series in which we will explore the question, what does it mean to work against the institution you work for? This is the first episode of the event series that works with this question, organized by Erasmus School of Color. We are a collective at Erasmus University Rotterdam that works towards dismantling racist, patriarchal, and ableist structures within and beyond the university. We want to thank Erasmus Institute for Public Knowledge for their support in organizing this event series. I am Melissa Ersoy, master's student at our university, and I will be hosting this event today together with my co-host Suar Hamena, who is also an active member of the ESOC community and a PhD candidate at the ER. I first want to say that we are overwhelmed by the attention and interest that this event has received. For us, this also again shows how urgent this question raised by Moten and Harney is. We have received applications from people affiliated with universities and other institutions from all over the world. Thank you all for your interest in our event and for joining us today. If you wish to attend the next episodes in this series or want to know more about the work we do as ASOC, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We will add the links in the chat box. This idea for this event series came from reading the university last words with our ESOC reading group. The question that Moten and Harney raised in their article is really close and urgent to us because we are involved in a shared practice of trying to disrupt and dismantle the university's violent structures without, as Moten and Harney warn us against, becoming stakeholders in the university. And it is exactly through this work that we say we refuse to abandon the university altogether. With this event series, we want to learn from the experiences of people that do disruptive work by working within and against different institutions. In this first episode, we present this question to people working within Dutch academia. But first, I am excited to say that we have Zuleyka Bibi Shaikh with us today. Zuleyka is also part of the ESOC collective and a dear friend of mine as well, and will be performing one of her poems. Zuleyka Bibi Shaikh is a decolonial feminist, poet, writer, yogi, activist, teacher, and PhD candidate at the International Institute of Social Studies. Her poetry, short stories, and academic writing are positioned in the liminal space where decolonial thought meets Black, Dalit, Chicana feminisms. In her PhD research, she refuses the master's tools, and through her work, she attempts to transcend identity politics by focusing on onto-epistemological justice and collective resistance and liberation. Thank you, Zuleyka, for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Is it working now? Yes. Thank you so much for having me and for including me in this event. I'm just going to go ahead and start with the poem, which is entitled Feast. Knowledge. I am hungry for it. With gluttonous abandon, I devour it, leaving you depleted, exhausted, drained. Still, you come back for more. Why? Because I promised you something, a piece of paper, legitimacy, a seat, a table. Ah, your ancestors fell for that too. So many generations, yet so little learned. Once a coolie, always a coolie. You say you are doing this for them, but you did not heed their warning. Silly. They could not read. What's your excuse? A print too small? You can stay here, you know, and feed off the knowledge of others as I do. Drain them, deplete them, leave them worse off than before. Call this research. We will reward you, praise you. Hell, we'll even give you that piece of paper. Go on then, this is what you came for. Cannibalize yourself in the pursuit of knowledge. Gnaw on the bones of your ancestors. Drink their blood spilled in the sugarcane field so that you may arise anew in my own image. And whilst we drown you in a black gown, think not of your ancestors draped in the Kalapani. Think not of their sweat fertilizing the soil. Think not of their tears watering the sugarcane. Think not of their backs broken to sweeten my tea. Instead, think that you are one of us now and feast. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuleika. That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for your brilliant words and for the insightful poem. I mean, it's always great to hear or read your poetry. And I think your words fit perfectly what we're attempting to discuss today. So again, thank you. It was really a pleasure to hear that poem. Hi, everyone. My name is Zuhair Hamena. I will try to give a short introduction to today's conversation. I will try to make it not too long to give our guests plenty of time to give us their reflections. So the question, what does it mean to work against the institution you work for? A question taken from Fred Moten and Stefano Harney's essay, The University Last Words, is a question that we believe encapsulates the very contradictions we are forced to navigate through on a daily basis. The question is an important question, precisely because it asks for a practice that takes survival serious, a practice that allows for a paycheck, while simultaneously being a practice that allows for the work to be done, the work we do that can be put under the rubric of a broader project of liberation. This work that we do is work against the violence of the institution, or more precisely, maybe it's work against the institution. As Melissa said, we think it's important to explore what this means to people working in various different institutions, precisely because we think that this question necessitates a collective answer. The answers to how to be together otherwise have to emerge out of a being togetherness. The answer to what does it mean to work against the institution you work for has to emerge out of a collectivity, out of a sociality. Learning from the ongoing Palestinian resistance against settler colonialism, learning from El Nashat, which is a form of cultivating land together, learning from this, we then have to formulate a practice of working against something one works for as a practice cultivated collectively. If not, then that practice ceases to exist. Today, we will reflect on what this means together in the context of the university. Moten and Harney write, and I quote, "What does it mean then to work for an institution, the self, the university, whose disappearance you desire, particularly when the expression and refinement of the desire is the work you do? What does it mean to work against the institution you work for when you're working against the institution is extracted by that same institution as surplus?" End quote. In this quote, they were undoubtedly formulating a theory for an abolitionist practice. But what then does it mean when your abolitionist work against the university is extracted by the university as surplus? Or, in the words of Dion Brand, I quote, "Capital steals time by organizing time and by managing times in ways that we hardly see. Time outside of capital is assigned as lazy or reckless, and coming from Saidiya Hartman's work, wayward, and people are incarcerated for disuse of time," end quote. So if we formulate by way of Dion Brand, time is being stolen, organized, and managed by capital, or in this case, more precisely, by a certain logic of capital on which the university runs, or maybe even more precisely, a certain logic of capital on which the university runs us and the earth into the ground from which it continues to extract, how then can we articulate and cultivate collective practices of working against the university when the university steals not just the work that we do against it, but when it also steals our time? This logic of capital is, of course, always colonial, because racial, patriarchal capitalism cannot be separated from coloniality and modernity, as the work from decolonial Black studies and queer feminist scholars, amongst others, teaches us. So if time is stolen by a colonial logic of capital on which the university runs, then the theft of time is intrinsically intertwined with the exploitation of our labor. Or in other words, when trying to navigate through the contradiction of working against whilst working for the university, we must find ways to navigate through the extractivist structures of the university, structures that reaffirm colonial permanence, as Leanne Betosomasak Simpson teaches us. When I say that Moten and Harney are referring to an abolitionist practice, I mean that in every sense of the word, every sense of the word in the formulation of Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who reminds us every single time that, I quote, abolition is about presence, not absence. It's about building life-affirming institutions, end quote. This presencing is a practice of care, a practice that is life-affirming, a practice that cultivates care, and in the words of Rinaldo Walcott, it is not an arrival, but rather an ongoing practice of care, an ongoing practice of being together. This practice has to be an ongoing practice because, by way of Badur Alagra, catastrophes are ongoing and not singular. They're not a singular event. Catastrophes are, in her words again, overlapping architectures of accumulation. So if you would then take the phrase, the only way out is through Sirius, then how do we move through these ongoing catastrophes, through these overlapping architectures of accumulation happening within and outside of the university? We should ask ourselves the question, by way of Moten and Harney again, what does it mean to be in but not of the university? Do we aspire a seat at the table? Which is to say, do we aspire to move towards institutionalization? A move that bears with it the risk of having our practices of care being reduced to administrative practices, to violent practices, a move towards sitting at a table built on extractivist colonial capital? Or do we find ways of being together otherwise within the university to do the work we think is important? For example, maybe by way of using resources that are at our disposal, or maybe by creating spaces to do the work we think is important, whilst also keeping in mind that we have to do this work across institutional lines, and whilst working on communities of care and life-affirming collective work that transcend university borders. I say all of this to say, what then does it mean to do life-affirming work against the university when that life-affirming work and the cultivation of that work, and with it our time, is extracted, stolen, and exploited by the university? A university that reaffirms colonial permanence through its extractivist exploitative structures. What does it mean to do this work of being in, but not of the university? We will try to discuss this today with three brilliant colleagues and friends. Today we have with us Jess Beer, whom I regard as one of my teachers. Jess is an assistant professor of urban sociology at Erasmus University Rotterdam, and the author of Mapping Israel, Mapping Palestine: How Occupied Landscapes Shape Scientific Knowledge. Her work combines sciences and technology studies with critical geography, drawing on work from post-colonial theory and feminist studies. We also have with us today Nina Keul, who is a junior assistant professor and fellow in media studies at University College Utrecht. Her scholarship is embedded in visual culture, critical data, and critical studies. She is also the chair of UCU's Diversity Committee and a member of the Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Committee, excuse me. She's also co-author of De Goede Immigrant, together with myself, which is the Dutch version of The Good Immigrant, published by Dipsaus, shout out to Dipsaus, and published by Plein. Last, but certainly not least, we have Giovanni Nobera. Gio works as an educational consultant and trainer at the Erasmus University Rotterdam and is engaged in the development of online education and training and supervision of university teachers. Gio is also a member of Concrete Blossom. Shout out to Concrete Blossom, which is a publishing and design studio that articulates new urban identities forged by migrant cultures through art, research, and storytelling. So now we will have approximately 10 minutes each for the three of our guests. If any, so who wants to go first? And they will just to make it clear, they will not give a theoretical unpacking of Moten and Harney's paper. Instead, they will reflect on what this question means to them in their practice, and what it means to them when they navigate through these contradictions on a daily basis. And maybe also reflect on some of the questions I tried to formulate in my introduction. So who wants to go first? Nina, go ahead, if you want to go first.
Yes, I can go first. Before responding to your question, Suhair, I want to thank the Erasmus students of color for dedicating so much of their time, their energy, and also their knowledge to creating these spaces of what you call it, a radical love, right? And these spaces of engagement. So I'm genuinely thrilled that you allow me to partake in these conversations, and you're very first. I suspect that only very few people know me and know who I am, and therefore I briefly like to complement your introduction. So here, well, call it a positionality. Very, very brief, I promise. I don't have a straightforward biography, neither professionally as an academic, nor my personal background, my upbringing. I've been living in the Netherlands for more than 17 years, and I consider this my home. I was born and raised in Austria. I have an Austrian mother and a Turkish father. I've been working in academia for 10 years, in the past 5 years at University College Utrecht, or UCU. And this is an international liberal arts and sciences college. This is affiliated with Utrecht University. Now, to respond to your key question, your starting question, what does it mean to work against the institution you work for? I could respond to this in multiple and myriad ways, right? But I've looked at some of the topics and the questions people have submitted beforehand, before this talk. And I sense, just like you, that I think many people want to hear about concrete examples, experience, and ways of maybe experience also in navigating this institution when you do the kind of transformative work that we are doing, right? So I'll start off by talking about my experience as a member of the Diversity Committee, a committee that I co-founded with 2 colleagues, Marca Valenta and Agnes Anderweg, a year ago. So this is essentially a bottom-up initiative and not a committee that was implemented top-down, and this makes all the difference. A few years ago, a few years before that, I'd also been a member of a top-down diversity committee, where not everyone was committed to or knowledgeable about the kind of diversity we're working towards, social justice and radical equality. That's my definition, the starting point of my definition of diversity. So one of the questions that we received beforehand was a specific question: how do you approach diversity in your institution, and how can it be more than a facade? The audience member wrote. So as it was, how can it not be a form of tokenism, right? Where diversity becomes sort of a convenient surplus value to the institution rather than a means for real transformation. So the Diversity Committee at UCU, the current Diversity Committee, bit of background, has 5 members, with 6 standing in for a colleague for a semester. Our understanding of diversity is that it's the kind of diversity that is aware of the material histories of exclusion and the entanglement of institutions like the university in this. We also strive to address various forms of marginalization and othering, not just racism, from racism, but also gender, sexuality, religion, disability, neurodiversity, first generation students, class, socioeconomic dimension. And we strive to do that in an intersectional way. Operationalizing that and putting that into practice is not always easy. All of the current members have both, and this is very important, I think. They have embodied knowledge, lived experience with respect to othering, some form of othering, and they're also conceptually informed. They have conceptually informed knowledge. So we have a shared vocabulary. We can already start at a certain point. And of course, they're all firmly committed. And I think that's one of the advantages of a bottom-up initiative, that there is no job description beforehand, and you have the autonomy. And we fought for this autonomy. I think we probably need to keep fighting for this autonomy, to give shape to it, who we are and what our mission is, right? We wrote our own mission statement. One of the disadvantages of a bottom-up initiative is, one could arguably, I mean, is that it takes time before it's taken seriously, and there is, it takes time to also have a budget allocated to this cause, money and time, right? So I'm not doing this for prestige, certainly not. So this is already one of the first dilemmas that you are also addressed here. Do you remain outside of the governance structures, or do you attach yourself to them? I personally think there's validity in both, and we need both. I think we need individuals, groups, communities who refuse to work with the institution. But I think there's also need for bodies that work with them, as we have decided to do. I think there will be contexts and phases where one is more necessary than the other. So we, the Diversity Committee, made the decision, as I said, to become an official advisory board. And that was just recent. So we formed a year ago, and we just, like in November, December 2020, we became an official advisory board. And I'm just going to give my personal decision, like my personal motivation, why I decided, and I really gave it a thought about this in spring 2020. Do I really want this? And then Black Lives Matter, the protests in the US happened. Of course, not the first, but it was a key moment. And I decided, okay, I've been working on this for such a long time. Now is the moment. I have to commit to it, and I have to persevere and continue for a little while. At least, I mean, I'm not sure that I'm going to be doing that forever, but I think now is a good phase to also align yourself with the governance of the institution. Because of the heightened sensibilities and also a certain level of openness and interest to do better. And I'm deliberately keeping this vague because I think for a lot of people, it still is very vague what it means to do better, right? And additionally, I just want to say it's not just because of Black Lives Matter and this being such a historic moment. A lot has happened before that, not just in the US, but also locally in the Netherlands. I mean, think of like thinkers and scholars like Philomena Asset, Gloria Wekker, White Innocence, a publication, work by artists like Quincy Gario, journalists like Saada Nurhusen, community organizers like the Black Archives, trans activists. There's so much going on. I don't think the universities are pioneers in the social justice movement. I think they respond to it. And I could sense that they felt the pressure to respond in like the last 1 or 2 years. And this is why I decided, okay, Diversity Committee, okay, let's align ourselves also as a body. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for universities to acknowledge the knowledge that has been and is being created outside of universities. And of course, it's still not taken seriously enough. It's like Gayatri Spivak said, a true work of resistance takes place in the margins. And I align with that saying. And one of the things that I try to do is I'm not, so I've told you all about my work as a diversity committee, but I'm also, the practice of care for me happens outside of the universities, not just the practice of care. Most of my knowledge I've acquired outside of the university with regard to, what do you call, abolitionist movement, decolonizing diversity, or decolonizing institutions. And I have my circles outside the university that on the one hand, they allow me to just vent and be and vent my frustrations with an institution, for example. But also we exchange knowledge. I've learned so much in that exchange. And I also sort of incorporate that knowledge in my teaching and in my scholarship. Either in my writing but also I invite speakers to the university. And I've been doing that for the last, at UCU, I've been doing that for the last 3 years. So Sara Nurhasun, Quincy Gario, Gary Young, I mean, yeah, Mitchell Isaias, I mean, they've all come, and this is what, together with colleagues, I'm not the only one. So this is, yeah, this is what we've been doing, and this is how we've been navigating that. I mean, this, I think, answers, might be a starting point for further discussion. There's so much more to say, like all the dilemmas, etc. But yeah, maybe that's enough for now, and we can continue the conversation further after the other speakers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, that was perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Nina. That's a great, insightful reflection, and it will definitely help us, or will not help us, but give us, I mean, give us some more food for thought and stuff to talk about after after Jess and Giovanni shared their reflection. So again, thank you, Nina. That was wonderful. So who wants to go next, Gio or Jess? I'm not going to force anyone. I mean, like, just go for it. Should I flip a coin?
Oh, am I going? I was unmuted. Gio, did you want to go second? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. And I think since you're unmuted yourself, or you were unmuted, I think the floor is yours now, Jess.
Oh, am I going? Okay. Is that okay with you, Gio? Yeah. Okay, thanks so much also for the invitation. I was really looking forward to talking about this and thinking through this with all of you. Thanks also to Zuhair, yeah, for that kind introduction, and Nina for your thoughts as well. It's really helpful to hear your experiences, because also our experiences are related but different. So the kind of similarities and overlap, but also the differences are interesting there. I kept my, all right, I'm checking time. Mark's a little bit closer to the Harney and Moten text, so the university last words text. But I'll try to fit in, and also in the Q&A, sort of my experiences as well there. And this also, what I'm going to say, sort of comes out of things that I've been thinking about in terms of how to engage with and how to be in the university as well. So thinking about Harney and Moten, they open the text with a concern that I think has been relevant to them throughout their work, but comes forth more explicitly here. And that is their analysis of what they call like the subversive or the critical intellectual. So that's someone who, you know, engages in the expression of solidarity in the absence of the practice of solidarity. And to me, also speaking from my experience at the university, that's a very beneficial way to start thinking about our own practices and responsibilities in relation to the university. Because that was something that I wouldn't have predicted. I think perhaps being a bit naive, like starting as a university student way back, but that I think is very much a dynamic that happens in universities. And that's that there are a lot of people who say supposedly the right thing, or they talk radical politics, but then are terrible to everyone around them and themselves, and just can't seem to find a way through that. And that was a commitment that I tried to make very early on, that I'm still working on fulfilling, for better or for worse. It's something that comes up pretty much every day, to be honest, in terms of daily interactions. But that commitment was that I didn't want to be able to separate my life from my scholarship. And I didn't want to be able to try to say things that then can be extracted as looking edgy or whatever, without actually doing right by the people who taught me those things, and for whom I learn and engage with and also discuss. So that was really something that, yeah, I think in the early days also, so I should say a little about my background. So I come originally from the US, and did my master's in New York, and then did my PhD in Maastricht, and now work at Erasmus University as an assistant professor. So this was something that really became sort of present to me, especially in the US, I should say. So it's not in my current institution. Though it shows up in a recurring fashion. But you see this also in a lot of the discussions about things like harassment in the university, for example, or the Me Too movement, or is that sometimes it's by people who don't profess radical politics, but it is also by people who do. And I saw it also especially in relation to a lot of the practical aspects of engaging with the university. So for example, people who have to work and have to miss class, or you have children and you can't make a meeting or they need to come to the meeting. It's something that's come to the fore now, but it's always been an issue in the university where the assumption comes out of this sort of wealthy white male existence where you're an independent person who has no ties to anyone and you can be in a place totally focused in a quiet environment anytime you want. Whereas I think for even the majority of the people who actually are in the university, that's still not the case. So even people who have the privilege of being in the university don't actually have that. There's also the related assumption of mobility that you can move anywhere. And as someone who's made that move, and I think, yeah, Nina and many of us also have, we can talk about that there's really ripple effects in terms of your life and also in terms of your working life that are now very present, I think, in the current circumstances. But so I made a commitment, I tried to make a commitment to myself early on that I wasn't going to stay if it meant that I had to give up on trying to learn how to be respectful and to listen and to engage with people where they were. So Harney and Moten talk about this, and Zuhair, you also pointed to this in your introduction, when they say that whatever vision we have at the university should begin with what we can practice. And they also sort of talk about the practice of our presence. And that's something that I think can be sort of something that can be cultivated in terms of small interactions and also in terms of thinking more structurally about the university, is thinking about what we can do now, what are we practicing now, what is happening both in small interactions and more broadly in the university, and what are the consequences of it and how does it relate to the ways that people are able to account for themselves and for each other. So in this respect, I think the Harney and Moten text is very helpful. Thinking you can't think of critique as something that's separate from the institution and from the individual and from the society. And similarly, you can't think of the university as something that's apart from the society. It should be an open place, and for a long time it has not been, and it still is very much not. And there's been a lot of critique of that is very important. But I think refocusing there is very helpful. However, at the same time, I think if you do that, perhaps it can take us to a different place than Harney and Moten go. So they have this assessment of the critical intellectual, but then they also sort of have a prescription for what to do then. And their prescription relates to the fact that they're trying to get the point across that there's, as to how serious and how restrictive the structures of the university are. Right. So I think they want people, and especially I think in some ways they're speaking to intellectuals who tend to sort of romanticize the notion of the university. They want people to understand that, yes, this is, especially in the US, but also here to a certain extent, the university is a business. It's a neoliberal institution that's for extracting labor and money and time and attention. And I agree with that diagnosis, but I also think that what can be beneficial today is to really talk about what we would want the university to be, or what we would want to do with each other, and then whether or not that is possible within something that's called the university. So Harney and Moten compare the university to, at different times, to a refugee camp or to a plantation of enslaved people. And again, I think they do that to sort of break some of the naivety about what the university is for. But at the same time, I think we have to be really careful there, because people who have been in refugee camps, who are in refugee camps, people who have been enslaved, would very much say, no, it's not. You know, like I think it ignores a bit of the privilege that at least some of us have. It ignores a bit the opportunities that we might have in relation to others. And I think it papers over maybe some of the things that can be learned also there. And so I had really mixed reaction, and it's something, so this question of, they say that there should be an exodus from the university. So in the end, they really call for a general strike. But that I felt uneasy with that. And not because I disagree with their diagnosis at the university, because these are institutions that were elitist, were and are elitist, racist, sexist, like they're institutions of white colonialism and white supremacy. Like these are what, like, and you can look back into what people were saying when they're building the university, and they said this very explicitly, right? So it's not a secret at all. It's just that now there's more attention to the consequences of this. But at the same time, for me, the question is, if there's going to be a general strike, then what is it for? If we're going to have an exodus, then where are we going to? Because there are no unproblematic institutions or practices. So for me, this question of, how do you work against something and be in it is much more interesting than how do we get out of it? Because there is no getting out. It has to be generative within the situation you're in. And the situation will always be messed up in some way. So a lot of dealing with these institutions, and I think, Nina, you really pointed to that, is dealing with the messiness of that. And that's not something you can have an overarching principle or an overarching plan to, but I think you can say, what do we value and what do we want to focus on? And if they're extracting our time, well, what do we want to be spending our time on? Rather than saying, because it is something of a privileged position to say, yes, we should all leave the university, because some people do need the university to live. Or they need and we think about this a lot in terms of education, right? Maybe it does less violence to abolish grades, for example. But if we don't give grades, then people who need the accreditation can't get it. And some people really need the accreditation in order to be able to live. I don't think they're easy. There are definitely other ways that things could be done. That doesn't mean we have to just go on giving grades the way that it has been gone. But I think we need to really think seriously about those trade-offs. And to think seriously, if we're leaving the university, well, are people then going into movements? But of course, there's been racism and sexism in movements. Maybe people, you're going back to your family, but there's racism and sexism and classism in your family, right? So we never get out of these things. So we have to turn them upside down, undo them, take them apart, light them on fire where we are. And I think that perhaps different people have different roles to play, and different people have different privileges and face different challenges. And that's something that I think those of us who have a certain amount of privilege within the institution need to be a lot better about being accountable for what we're able to do, rather than throwing that away. So for me, the question of whether we stay or go is less important than the question of, what can we do for each other and with each other, and how can we learn to live with each other and with ourselves? Because for me, what's important, what the university can do is that, you look at the screen and I look at all the people who are here, and I look at what ASOC's been doing, and I look at our students, especially, who are coming in and the ideas they have and the things they're bringing. For me, having those conversations and thinking together, that's something that we can do, and that the university allows, that would not be allowed per se in another kind of institution that exists now. So then the question is, to the extent that we're able to make the university a space for that, and a space where it's about the people, let's do it. And if that's not possible, then you leave. But I think it's worth moving forward on several fronts. And we don't know what can be generated yet by what we have now. So I think it's worth giving that a shot.
Thank you a lot, Jess. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and learn from you. So thank you a lot for those insightful words. Again, just like Nina's reflection, I think there's a lot in there in which we can talk about. But first, let's listen to Gio and Gio's reflection, and then we can move on to a conversation to see if we can learn from each other. Gio, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Zuhair. I'm going to time my speech to see if I can make it in 10 minutes. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here, and also ASOC as well. I caught up to them, I think, somewhere beginning of 2020, and there was this sense of militancy that I got from their rebuttals, responses to the university and their way of doing things. So that's what attracted me to them, and in that sense, I got in touch with the lovely people. Thank you for inviting me. Before I give my view on things, I wanted to first briefly sketch the context that where I'm coming from, and how did I came into the university, and how did I ended up here. So I'm Giovanni. My parents are born in Cape Verde Islands, off the coast next to Senegal. Big independence war at 75, and before 75, a lot of Cape Verdeans came to Rotterdam. Cape Verdeans are known sailors, so usually people arrive by boat, worked in the harbor a lot. Since Rotterdam is a port city, you have a lot of Cape Verdeans in Rotterdam. If you're from Rotterdam, you know what I'm talking about. I am the offspring of two people that came here around 13, 12 years old, as they say, in search of a better life. If you're talking about my grandparents. And I ended up in Delfshaven, where you have a lot of Cape Verdean families, Schiphol, Rotterdam West. That's what's up. So I can characterize my upbringing as a survival, actually. I come from a broken home. My mom did her best, 4 children, no father around. I must say, sometimes the environment was very hostile. There was very little stimulus in my area. My area was characterized by different problematic things. You can think about drug dealing, pimps, hoes, everywhere, needles in the streets. I've seen it all, and that didn't affect me until I got older. This lack of stimulus inside my own environment, it pulled me towards studying education. How do one develop himself? How do a person think about herself? How do you advance in life, brain-wise, psychology-wise, and your social structures, etc. And in that sense, I came into the educational science bachelor at Utrecht University. I consider myself very curious. So even though I came from this area with low stimuli and maybe less beneficial surroundings, I always considered myself a reader and try to improve myself and educate myself about certain topics. I did the master's and the bachelor's in Utrecht, and then I came back to Rotterdam. I always lived in Rotterdam. And I didn't go straight into the university. I tried to do some entrepreneurial work first. That was fairly a success. But then I started at university in 2017. In my humble opinion, I thought that I was going to join the university to do something for my city, since I am from Rotterdam, and you know, people from Rotterdam can be very proud of where they come from. And I must say, it also gave me a certain status quo, working as an educational consultant trainer at a fancy institute with a high respectable whatever. But as I progressed in that job, and the concept of doing things for other people, other questions that started to pop up is, wait a minute, if I'm working for the university, in the university, for my city and its people, which people are we talking about? And it didn't take long for me to realize that the people that I was contributing to, 99% of them didn't came from where I came from, didn't know the culture where I came from, didn't see the same things that I saw growing up. So I realized that if you work in university, you do things for a certain group of people, a select group of people. And nobody looked like me in that environment. In the beginning, I was cool with that, but as I got older, I now reached 30, I started to change my belief systems about these things. I started to grow my hair. I started to grow the beard. I couldn't fit anymore into that white collar life, so to say. In that sense, I threw all of my white collars out. And if I'm giving my educational training, I just wear my robe at my home. Why? Because I'm at home, and that's where I wear my robe. If you don't like that, you can get out of my training. So you can see this attitude of not giving an F anymore about what people could think or made of my appearance, and just do as I do and do my work, because I am very good at my work, and I can say that out loud. The evaluations speak for itself. As a support staff, I'm a little bit on the sideline if we're talking about the university. For those of you who don't know, the university's first priority is publishing, research, etc. Education is actually the second job of all the researchers that work there. This is problematic in itself, I think, because I have a very great passion for education, and I love being in contact with people and conversing with people and educating people. That's why I chose this role. That's why I chose this job. But you can't blame the researchers or the PhDs or whatever that also have a passion for education. You can't blame them for not being able to put enough effort into the education, because the first calling of the university is researching, publishing, etc. And in that respect, I can see there's a very big pressure on employees of the university to, on the one hand, do their research, do their publications, because that's what you do in this competitive environment. And on the other hand, try to give education, do education, and do that in a proper way. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I must say it's not all bad in the university, because there are some great projects that I'm in, that I really put my heart into. And those are projects that are more close to the things that I can have impact on. If I can name one example, we have this study skill course for refugee students coming from all over the world. Let's say the HAVO VVO of Syria, Eritrea, etc., etc. And they have the chance to follow the study skill course with us. And I gladly teach these kids ranging from 16 to 20, 21 years old, who have this ambition and this crazy drive to make it in life, because they already came so far. So in that sense, I really like working at the university, and I love the contact with other people, because that's also what it's about. However, also in the light of the different things that are happening in the world, let's take the protests as a starting point. And as Nina mentioned, universities are definitely not pioneers, they respond. One thing that really bugged me was the anti-racism statement by the EUR around April, May, that came 2-3 weeks too late. And that was, in Dutch they call it, that was a statement of likmefesje. I couldn't find anything in that statement that was very powerful, that said they were going to do something about it, that said that we're going to tackle this problem. No, instead, all I got was a half a page of kumbaya and business as usual. And yeah, we know about this and we're going to do something about it. I don't know if that is really the case. It's hard for me in the sense that, what does it mean to work in the university you work against? You work in it, but also against. At the same time, you see that you can get your salary out of it. You're making a living off it. But that also means that you perpetrate the system every day. That you are also part and parcel of the university's ongoing practices in that sense. So I am very dual about this. I am very split about this. But as for now, what I try to do is I try to be less dependent of the university and the living that I get off of it, and try to work my own way out. I have an amazing crew of people that I work with outside the university, Concrete Blossom, something that I got hooked up on, let's say 18 months ago, 1.5 years ago. And this really opened my eyes to this other reality of building own institutions and building your own places, spaces where you can be with your people and do things that are culturally relevant. That is my timer, so I'm going to close it off now. That was 10 minutes. I have an uitsmijter here. If someone knows how to translate that as well, please do. So I also heard a seat at the table sometimes, getting a seat at the table. Do you want a seat? If I can quote a good partner of mine who I work with frequently, I think a seat at the table is not necessarily about the seat or the table. It's about eating. And basically, we don't need your table because we can eat on the ground, sitting. And that's actually the end of my TED Talk. So thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Gio. Thank you. Thank you for representing Delfshaven as well. It's good to hear that. Thank you for that reflection, also really important from the side of support staff within the university, especially because in a lot of cases when we speak about stuff like this, it's usually only either researchers or teachers, whilst the university has a plethora of people working in there, whether it's from students to support staff to teachers to professors to researchers to cleaning staff. And it's really important to have these other perspectives as well if we want to build a practice together, to a practice of care to be able to navigate better through the university. I think there were a lot of interesting things that were said in all three reflections. So I'm just gonna throw a couple of the things I've heard back in the group, and we're just gonna open it up and just respond to it, right? Just try and have a bit of an organic conversation between the four of us. Maybe Melissa wants to join as well, so the five of us. So one of the things that maybe is good to talk about is, because it came back, and I think all three of your reflections, is the way the university responds to things that are happening outside, right? Outside is a bit of a weird formulation, but it responds to whatever is happening in society, because university is very much part of society as well. And one of the things it responded to recently, or most universities, is the anti-racism, right? All of the universities came out with a statement, which is, in most cases, it was quite of a PR stunt, more of a marketing thing. As Sara Ahmed would tell us, it was showing evidence of doing something without actually doing something, right? So they were writing these statements of this is what we want, this is what we think is important, but then in all actuality, most universities don't do shit. So I think it's important to talk about what that means for us and our work within the university against it while we're working for it. Also, that ties in with our complicity, because I think that came back as well in all three reflections, right? Especially with the whole notion of a seat at the table, the notion of having the things that we do becoming institutionalized, right? And what that means in terms of our complicity. We are all complicit in various ways, but what does that mean for a practice that we could cultivate together? And also, I think it's important to speak about where are we going to, right? Because I think this came back as well in all three reflections, whether directly or not. But where's the university headed? Where do we want the university to head to, or where do we think it's important to go to? Whether it's outside of the university or within the university, or some kind of other formulation of existing in within this contradiction, because it doesn't have to be binary, right? It doesn't have to be either or. We don't have to choose just between leaving or staying. There could be other ways of having a practice. So these are just a couple of things that stood out to me when I was listening to all three of your reflections. So yeah, let's have a conversation. So who wants to respond first?
Is there a specific question that I can maybe answer? Or
There's not a specific question. It's more of like, what do you think about the fact? Let's start off with where are we going to, right? If you want a specific question, where do you want the university to head to, or where do you think we should go to, right? And this is within the context of the contradiction of maybe leaving or staying or something else, and also where is it headed to, or where do we want it to head to? Let's start off with that one.
Do you want somebody in particular to respond?
Like I said, it's a conversation between all five of us. So if you feel like you want to say something, just say something.
Yeah, I want to, there's a lot in what Jess and Giovanni said that I also had on my mind and I can very much align with. So one of the things that Jess emphasized was, well, what does it mean if we're sort of leave this institution? Where do we go? And as somebody who's worked in a lot of different places, from media, from arts and culture, film production, I can tell you, they are also systems of oppression. So though there is no, like as institutions, no institution is necessarily completely decolonized. So I also share this more sort of the constructivist approach that, okay, let's transform the institution. And if you have the sort of the state of mind, the energy, the stability, also the mental, emotional stability, and maybe the means, the material means, then in my case, I have a permanent contract. So so I can also, I was already sort of engaging in this kind of work before, but I also consider myself privileged to some extent, and I'm firmly committed to this work. So then let's do this and try to transform the university towards a more socially just institution. And there's something that there are a lot of things that also that Giovanni said, sort of, what does it serve, right? You were very much, I think, disappointed to see that the university doesn't serve your community, right? So and one of the things that, because I also thought about, how do we reimagine the university? So let's not just try to sort of be against, but where are we going towards, right? So and for me, transforming the university, I see it, I'm reimagining the university, I see it as a public university, first of all, that serves the greater good, and amongst which are certainly social justice and radical equality, not capitalism. So the question, of course, is also, we are in a neoliberal university, as Jess also said. We work at a neoliberal universities, and how far is this possible? But we could still reimagine, we can allow ourselves to reimagine a public non-capitalist university, and towards a more pluriform or pluriversal sort of place, rather than hierarchical place. And I think we also should, at university, abandon this notion of universality, so universality of knowledge, and redefine what it means, the whole notion of excellence, academic excellence. A place where our labor is not quantified, but it is about engaging with each other, thinking with each other, reflecting with each other. And with each other, I mean people who work within the university, students, support staff. Even the notion of sideline, I think we also need to, like, that it says a lot. And I know why you use that term, but why is it the sideline, right? So we have to overcome these hierarchies, I think, and but also engage with, as I said before, with people who do not work for or study at a university. So yeah.
And that's also something in the text, because they are critical of administration. But I was like, you have to be really specific in terms of who you're talking about, because there's a lot of people who do what's called administrative work who very much contribute to exchange among people, supporting people if they're having challenges. Like it's care work that is undervalued and often underpaid. And then there's administration in terms of people who make 4 times what even a professor makes, who come from the business world. And, you know, so there's a lot of diversity even within the term administration. And I think we have to be really careful not to devalue the care work that actually is one of the core facets of what a university could be, right? About like living together and caring. So that's important that you bring that up, Nina. And someone also asked about, yeah, the separation in Dutch academia between like Habo, Mabo, and university, so trade schools and higher education. And I think in terms of, so one of the things in terms of thinking about the university is I think often, or at least in my own experience, we get dragged into these conversations of like, which kind of approach is more valid, meaning, should it be about you know, people relating to each other and about reflecting on your own background and privilege or not privilege? Should it be about structural change? And one of the things that I've sort of realized for myself is that it has to be about everything all at once, which makes, so it's about, yeah, not trying to assume things or be a jerk to people or use your own privilege against someone unwittingly or unwittingly, but it's also about structural change in terms of how the university is organized. And so things like that, where the really hard separation of different kinds of knowledge, I think hampers academia, and it comes from a very class-based, a rigid economic class-based system that also, of course, has ripple effects across other things. And also I think serves to separate the university from the city and from the communities where it is even more. So I think we have to think on many different levels, including, yeah, structural reworking. And there's a lot of really interesting work that goes on that like then in the university we end up being ignorant of because there's this separation. Yeah, also social justice, but also, yeah, intellectual work. Yeah.
So just to rephrase the question then, do you think that we can truly transform the university? Do we think we can truly decolonize the university, as the university is pretty much I mean, depending on which continent and in which way it's organized, it's pretty much a colonial, especially the modern Western university is a colonial organization. And is it truly, do you three think, or you four think, possible to actually transform the university into something that is more care-based and more collective and more in line with sociality? Or do you think we should just use whatever is at our disposal and try to work on building communities maybe within the university or elsewhere?
Yeah, if you go Gio and then I'll go after.
Excuse me, that's my phone. I think there is a possibility to transform the university. I think when you get to certain levels in the universe, certain ranks, I definitely think you can have influences on how things are going in the university. However, I think that climbing up in the university and coming to certain positions, I think that will also take its toll on you as a person and you and your personality. If it doesn't corrupt, then it probably erodes. I think, not to be too negative. Then my suggestion would be then why not put that same energy into creating something of your own and using your own leverage, your own capital to create your own institutions. Um, if I can dive deeper into that, um, So Nina mentioned, and I wrote this down, that the knowledge created outside the university, I think that knowledge is just as valuable as the knowledge created in the university. Apart from the credentialing of the university, and I think what Jess mentioned about getting credentials to make a living, and I think we have more leverage and capital than we think. And the Corona crisis and university giving online classes, I think that has really shown us that what can an institution, a higher education institution offer next to streaming services of 2,000 euros a year? Isn't there another way that you can get that knowledge, put that knowledge to work, and maybe create a living out of that? So in that sense, what I try to aim for is that same energy that I could put into climbing the ranks in university. I can put that same work into the people I live here. Here with close by, the people that come from my community. Invest that same energy in them, and try to make that blossom actually, instead of trying to do that through the university. I think Jess wants to be unmuted.
And Zahir, could you repeat the question again? Sorry. I lost my train of thought.
Do you think that we can transform the university?
Yeah.
In line with that, do you think the university is a site that can be decolonized, or do you think that we should seek other ways of moving forward?
So the way that, and I think this speaks to what Gio said is really interesting here. The way that I've been thinking about it is to accept the fact that we don't actually know. That's a lot, and which is in keeping with a lot of social justice work and a lot of activism. Because on the one hand, 100 years ago, many of the people who are in the university, including myself, including many of the people we work with every day, wouldn't have been allowed in, wouldn't have been allowed to enter the building, unless you're working as a cleaner. So a lot has changed, for better and for worse also, in a relatively recent time span. So the university, despite the fact that it's very conservative as an institution in general, has been transformed, which means it can be transformed again. But on the other hand, a lot of this involves doing things, people doing what you're able to do at working across multiple levels, coordinating, always trying to generate spaces that are valuable while also changing structures that are not. And a lot of the outcome of that work isn't set. And so we don't actually know. And that's something that I think maybe we don't need to decide. I think it's the more worthwhile question is, what should we do? And then let's see what happens. And even in the sense of wondering, thinking about what the university should be for, I think it's okay to start from a point where there's a lot of things I think that would come out right away where we could say, yes, it should be about people, about being a public good, about connecting to the community and things. But at the same time, we don't actually know what a best, what a good, what a well-functioning institution of some kind for generating diverse knowledge would look like. And so part of doing the work is also finding that out rather than assuming we know from the beginning. And that's why I think working in the university, working outside the university, all of it, we should be doing all of that. And it shouldn't be either, because Gio can do things that I can't do, Nina can do things that I can't, and vice versa. And then a lot of it is seeing what's working and what's not, and going with things that feel generative for the things that you want. So sometimes you can make a space to have a conversation and read a text, and that may be in the university, or maybe you're not allowed, and then you find another place.
True.
And that I think we can have to be let things emerge, and try to create the conditions in which they can emerge, but that involves doing a lot of different things all at once, actually.
Who says that I think there's this notion that the knowledge generated within the university or within public education, higher public education institutes, that that is the pinnacle of the knowledge creation that we have. whereas there's enough examples of places where knowledge is created as well, situated knowledge, which is more important in that context than the knowledge created in that higher education institutes. I'm a big fan of hip hop. Literally my fluency in English comes from hip hop music, listening to hip hop music. So just by doing that and being with people in my own neighborhood that never ever even set a foot into higher education places or even have their degrees from the MBO, with much more knowledge than the average student in a higher education institute. So that's something that I've been working on, and we're going to work on together with Concrete Blossom, like articulating those spaces where knowledge is created as well. Think about the different barbershops where I go almost every week. Think about the Shisha Lounge where the people from the street go. You know, just those informal institutions that we have in the hood. I think that has the same value as the higher education institutes, usually outside the city.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hip hop has as one of its founding elements knowledge, right? So knowledge is intrinsically intertwined with hip hop, and I like what Jess said as well. It basically boils down to we'll figure it out while we are figuring it out. So that's sort of like how we move. Yeah, Nina, go ahead.
No, I fully align with that. There's a historian, Howard Zinn, who calls it the optimism of uncertainty. And I have this quote on my wall just to remind myself when I'm frustrated. And I can read it to you. Revolutionary change does not come as one cataclysm moment, but as an endless succession of surprises, moving zigzag towards a more decent society. And I think when you do this kind of, yes, it can change. I always say when people ask me, do you think it can change? And I say, well, think about 100 years ago, which is what Jess actually said as well, how it has changed with the role of people who are not male, right? Yes, I think it can change, or at least we have to have this optimism of uncertainty or hope. Yeah, and we have to also, you know, have some form of conscientious disobedience at times, and allow ourselves to be disobedient at times. And I think both Jess and Giovanni, in their sort of first talks, mentioned that. And I think it's, and you can also allow yourself to be disobedient at times within an institution. You don't always have to conform. And if you want to do a transformational work, I think you cannot be a conformist. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think it might be time now to ask some questions that the audience has.
And could I say one thing quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
It is, and I think you both pointed to this, it is worth keeping in mind the cost of doing, but also keeping in mind the cost of both ways. So when you conform, there's a cost, and when you go against the flow, there's a cost. And whatever you do, there will be a cost. But often that means that when you're trying something, you're taking a chance. You're saying, well, I don't know if we can be in solidarity with each other, but the cost of trying is better than the cost of not trying. So that is hopeful in the sense that you're poking and seeing what happens, and poking, and it's a lot of being in the mess and just trying at each chance and trying to make something grow out of that. So it's not, it's very difficult and tiring work. It does mean that, yeah, sometimes you are complicit or strategic, but at other times there's actually more opening. So things were done a certain way that's very discriminatory because the people who did it didn't think about it. And then, you know, we can show up and be like, well, actually, why don't we just let everybody in? And they're like, oh, okay. Like, so there are also times when suddenly like nobody thought about it and now you can just do it differently. The policy was no policy, you know. So, but a lot of it is pushing and reacting and pushing and reacting. That takes diverse strategies, like in also in different kinds of knowledge and approaches. Okay. But yeah, that's different from for against. So for me, it's like, I'm against white supremacy and I'm against, you know, whiteness and against patriarchy. So what I'm doing, is it going to support that or go against that? And I'm for the university in the sense that I'm for the people everybody who's involved in some way or would like to be involved in some way in the university. And higher education, I should say. So including, I think, HAVO, MAVO, all that. But I'm not for the university as an institution or a set of protocols or a building or, yeah.
But then, so how would you navigate through the complicity in whiteness, for example, in your daily practice? Do you like, are you aware of it? Do you have a way of moving through that, or are you just like, I am complicit. I'm going to try to not reproduce these things in as much as I can. But when it happens, I just have to check myself. Like what do you think? Like what do you do in that practice to sort of not reproduce those violent structures? And in the meantime, I'll be looking at the question. So if someone wants to fill the silence, go ahead.
Just needs to be unmuted, I think.
No, yeah.
Yeah, and that's also something that I think doesn't come across as much in the text, is sort of also dealing with solidarity within the movement. So I think that if you're in a privileged position, and again, we can talk about the notion of privilege, but I'm using it here just because I think it's intelligible, at least on a basic level. If you're in a relatively privileged position in a situation, whatever that is, you're going to be complicit in the institution because you're going to benefit whether you try to or not. What I try to do, and often I fail at it, or often I'm not aware when I should be, but what I'm trying to do both is, reading and, learning from different kinds of knowledge and different people and different thinkers also outside the university so that you can become more aware. So doing that work for yourself so that others aren't always asked to do it for you. So it's not someone else's job to tell me that I'm unintentionally being a jerk, that I can develop sort of a awareness of that. But also, this is something that I think activists have really pointed to that is really important, making white people accountable for whiteness, meaning that if someone else does something that is disrespectful or discriminatory or that uses violence, then I'm the one who calls them out, so that the people of color in the room aren't the ones who are then, or our students aren't the ones who then have to call them out. Again, like often I fail, or sometimes you have to be strategic and deal with it after or not in the moment, but I'm trying to be better about that. That I think that's why I say that sometimes little things can matter, in the sense that if we're in a committee meeting and you're deciding like on employment or something and somebody says something disrespectful, it's important then that, someone who's white in the meeting goes, we shouldn't look at it that way. I think there's other ways to do this. But I don't think that makes you not complicit. I think it just makes you a traitor to a thing that it's good to be a traitor to.
Nina, did you want to respond to that?
Everything that Jess says, and maybe one of the questions that I navigate almost daily is can I adhere to my principles without becoming maybe dogmatic? Because I know I have this self-awareness that I am also complicit, or as I sometimes call it, I'm an implicated subject. So I think also being sincere about that, I think might be a start as well, that we are all complicit. And then where are the moments where I might allow myself to make strategic compromises? And where do I have to be? When do I have to be principled? Sort of, what fights to fight, which battles to choose. And I think something that you also mentioned just before, find your allies, form allyships. There is so much, I mean, we've talked about communities, non-academic communities, but also within university, there are these pockets, these spaces, either of individuals or team groups who are doing similar work. And we need to connect, I believe, and find each other, connect with each other, and become allies, share, exchange knowledge, experience, and become more, yeah, like a community, and become more visible as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's time to open up the conversation and have people ask their questions. There have been a couple of questions in the chat box that have been answered. There's, I think, one that is interesting that has sort of like only been half answered. So I want to pose that question first, and then I would like to. I think it's good. I think it's good to open up the floor if anyone wants to say something, ask a question, have a comment. Maybe Zuleika wants to comment as well, and I think I saw some hands being raised as well. So let's use the remaining half hour for that. So first, the question that I think that was only partially answered or just like mentioned a bit briefly that someone asked is, I don't know anymore who asked the question, but maybe the person doesn't even want to be addressed by their name. So I'm just going to read the question is, what do speakers think and have experienced with co-production of knowledge? So if any of you want to take that question, and then we can open it up and maybe first listen to what Zuleika has to say, give her the floor first, and then whomever has raised their hands can also comment or ask a question. So first, the question is, what do the speakers think of co-production or have any experience with co-production of knowledge?
Is that the question you want me to also reflect on?
Yeah, sure, if you want to. This question was addressed to the speakers, but if you want to take that question, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, of course, there's a lot that's going through my mind. As each person speaks, I get a new idea. But possibly, I think the best or easiest thing is to come back to the question of what does it mean to work against the institution you work for? And I guess with the issue that I have with Fred Moten and Stefano Hani is usually what I have with most of their writing is that it radicalizes you and it gets you all excited, but then it doesn't tell you how to do it. And of course, them imagining the world like this comes from their years and years of experience of being within institutions, but also reaching the position of professor. Whereas with a lot of us who are just starting out, we need to be complicit. If we don't single author publish, it's done. We're not going to move anywhere. And so this mass exodus it's almost 5 steps too far because some of us are not even properly in there yet. For example, my own position within academia, within Erasmus University, is as an unpaid employee. So I do my PhD, but the way that I get money is by working 3 or 4 other jobs at the same time. And that changes the relationship that you have with the university because you're not depending on the institution to pay your bills. So the kinds of things that I say, I feel like I don't really need to filter myself because my job is not dependent on it because they're not paying me for it. And then this idea of complicity has come up a lot. And I think the starting point is to just be transparent about your complicity. Because under the conditions of coloniality that we currently live in, there is no other option. Especially for someone like me, who's a first generation university goer. I'm from a working class background in South Africa. I think it's even, I don't even know how I got into an institution in the Netherlands, to be honest. So I think when it comes to this complicity and to what Nina was saying about the self-reflection, it's something that always has to be there. if you are not continuously asking yourself why you're making the decisions you're making, whether you're doing something for the recognition, whether you're doing something for acceptance, whether you're wanting to be accepted by the institution, all of these questions always have to be asked, because if you're not asking yourself these questions, and it's easy because with everybody aiming for inclusivity and diversity, we sometimes lose sight of what we're actually asking to be included in, which is a colonial institution. And when, I guess, it comes to the question of the co-production of knowledge, who are we co-producing this knowledge with? Are we co-producing it with professors? Are we co-producing it with people outside of the university? I mean, already the issue of producing knowledge, which I prefer actually the term cultivating knowledge, because producing knowledge just leads to this capitalistic competitiveness, but it's already imbued with power relations, and it always will be. So yeah, I hope that made sense.
That's definitely what I wanted to point out as well. If we're talking about co-production, who are the co-producers? Who initiated the co-production? Who is benefiting from this co-production? I think this is a term that people use. It's like giving them a mortgage so they can pay it back at one point. So I'm not very a fan of this co-creation, co-production thingy. I think if you need to call something co, then it's already fake and plastic, because the world is already a co-production. People living together is a co-production. You don't have to call it something that you do together with, because it already happens as is. So that's my small take on that frame of co-production. Is my Wi-Fi down or?
Yeah, we're all lagging. No, it's not. I was just looking through some of the questions. I think there were some hands raised.
Yeah, true.
I think it would also be nice to hear some other people's comments or questions. Nia, you told me someone had their hand raised. Could you maybe unmute that person?
Yes.
Ask whatever you want to ask or say whatever.
The person is unmuted now.
Yeah. Hi, is it me, right? I'm gonna
It's
try to
Bruno.
put
Yes.
I'm gonna try to put the cam on, but internet is not working so well. So, well, hi everyone. I'm Bruno. I'm talking now from Oulu, Finland, and this has been just a coincidence of things, because I randomly saw on Facebook about this. I checked it out, and then I realized that you are in the Erasmus University of Rotterdam, right? And I just realized that one project from our university here is connected with you through the UNIC project. I don't know if anyone knows about it. No, okay. Well, okay, no, because okay, so many thoughts and all your words have resonated so much with me. I mean, I'm kind of like speechless, but anyway, to the point. So there is this Universities of Europe project. It's 8 universities from all around Europe, like post-industrial universities. And the project is called UNIC. And there is this concept of super diversity that it's addressed through this project, talking about second and third generations of immigrants. So they are facing the diversity in different places, not anymore being like second generation, or who is anymore like a citizen or who is not, and why are there citizens that might not look like what it's expected to look like a citizen of a certain country, and so on. So there is this concept of super diversity, and I wanted to ask if you knew about it, or what was your stand on it as it's connected to your university. But maybe if it's not so known, maybe it doesn't make so much sense to ask about it. So maybe I just pose that for you to check on that. And because that's connected as well with the work on diversity done in my university, which we could talk about that long, because it has certain connotations. And so I wanted to know what was your feeling about it from the context of the Netherlands. So yeah, which, by the way, I lived there for a year and a half, so I have also connection with The Hague and Eindhoven and everything. So yeah, So happy to see you all, and hopefully we'll talk later. And yeah, I've been rambling but yeah, thank you, and stay safe and take care.
No, thank you, Bruno. Thank you for that. It's not rambling. I mean, I think you made perfect sense. So thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to what Bruno said before we let Ola, before we give Ola the floor. Does anyone want to respond to what Bruno said?
Well,
Zuleika, Nina, Jess, Gio.
I know the concept of super diversity, not necessarily from the university standpoint. I noted it, and thank you, Bruno. I'm going to dive into it. University of Europe. I never heard of it. It seems like an interesting concept to read about, so that's what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Very briefly, I'm aware of the concept. I think there's a scholar at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, the VU, Marius Krul, and he's working with that concept. And he took part in a Europe-wide transnational research program with comparing different countries using super diversity as a lens. Haven't really delved into it too much personally, but maybe what I could say is whether we use concepts like super diversity, decolonizing, or queering the university, what's always important is that we signify what we mean, because all of these notions, terms can become buzzwords. They can become container, in a Dutch containerbegrip, sort of empty signifiers, and then they can also be instrumentalized for a lot of things. Where so I think whether we use super diversity or diversity, decolonizing, queering institutions, we need to signify, delineate what is it that we mean. And this is why at the beginning I made sure that what we mean, when I mean when I say diversity, is that we connect it, is not just symbolic, but we connect it to material histories. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Not specifically about super diversity, but more general.
All right, thank you. Zuleika, do you want to respond to super diversity, or did you have another comment?
Yeah, about this this concept of super diversity. I mean, we shouldn't forget that the university is in the business of producing modern individualistic subjects. And so it is not a place that is eager to embrace difference, if I may put it that way. So whatever is coming in is being assimilated. And the resistance and the problems that we face is the refusal to assimilate. So this idea of super diversity, I mean, I'm at the Institute of Social Studies, which was taken over by Erasmus University, I think 2014, maybe a couple years before that. And we are 98% foreign students, and mainly students from the global South. So, and usually former colonies, so South Africa, Indonesia. And I mean, if I look at our curriculum, if I look at the kinds of things that we're doing, it's still very development studies based, which is still portraying us as inferior and training us to keep that inferiority going. So yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents worth on super diversity.
Yeah, thank you, Zuleika. No, I'm on your side. I'm not a big fan of the concept of super diversity either. But Bruno, let's link up and maybe we can talk about it. I don't know if just wanted to respond to super diversity, and then we can move to Ola. I will unmute you.
Yeah, just very briefly, I can't speak to their work specifically, but more to like the idea of diversity in general. I think it's important to take into account that when you're using terms like diversity, and I think these can have a lot of really beneficial effects within the university if you make them mean something, which I think is the kind of work that like Nina's doing now. You know, so if they have, yeah, consequences, then maybe it's fine to use them. But I think it posits diversity as something new or special. So as like an exception to this old, there's sort of an ahistoricist tint, as if everyone was the same, even in the Netherlands, like 100, 200 years ago. And now suddenly like we're very diverse. But so it sort of builds upon a nation stateist argument, like assuming as if nations were clearly delineated with populations that were easy to, you know, define back then. But I think if you look historically, that even if it was true temporarily, it was for a very short period of time. And one of the things that whiteness does is it makes it seem as if, you know, all white people are the same, but it's an umbrella category that allows in certain people to life and privilege, and violently excludes others. But it doesn't mean that those people that are inside are the same. The only thing that's the same about them is the privilege and the violence that we do. So I'm a little bit skeptical just of using it too much to suggest as if diversity is what's unique, when in fact the idea of sameness is the sort of, yeah, exception.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, thank you. Most definitely, I think I agree with you. Ola, I will unmute you now so you can ask your question or give your comment.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for the great talks. My question is more around the notion of praxis for people who are within the institution, whether in academic staff capacity or otherwise. And I was wondering if there are like case studies or situations that maybe people can someone could refer to where the notion of praxis, came up. How are we expecting people who have been trained to perform in academia as if they're invested in the capital that is the institution, the capital that is owned by the institution itself. And I also am within, I work within an institution as well. And I was just wondering, how can we sort of, have something that actually a practice that actually relates to praxis basically, or creates that, because we are all, doing stuff as if we own that capital, and we don't. We work for the institution, and that, whether we like it or not, obviously, and that has been addressed quite nicely here, we are limited. So I was wondering if there's, a commitment to praxis would make any difference in terms of, allowing for certain sort of temporal things to happen that might actually deliver knowledge in a way that is not exactly training people to act as if they have capital or they own the capital. So I don't really, I'm not addressing this question to someone in specific, but yeah, I welcome any comments on it.
Thank you, Ola. Who wants to respond?
I think Zuleika raised her hand.
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'm just,
More.
while Ola was speaking, I think when we speak about praxis, we're using it in this taken for granted way, in that we separate our lives from the university from the rest of our lives. And for many of us, that isn't the case. So the research that I do, the work that I do, the poetry that I write, it's not fragmented. It's not divorced from the university. And for a lot of Black women and women of color, all of our theorizing comes from the everyday. So the actual, I guess, practice of it is in the everyday. It's not in this grand gesture that you do, but it's in the everyday actions that you do. And then it comes back again to the complicity that you have, and not only your complicity in the university, but your complicity with capitalism in all of the things that you consume and the ways in which you're consuming them. So I think that's sort of a shift in thinking that needs to happen, especially with those of us who are present today and reading the kinds of texts that we're reading. Yeah.
Anyone else wants to jump on this?
I think I'm clicking multiple times. Thank you, Zuleika. That's, yeah. And I think that a lot of thinking about praxis also brings us back to the variety of ways that you can have an impact. So like Zuleika, this is, you also pointed earlier to something that, I mean, I think about a lot, because now sort of, you know, I'm pre-tenure, so my existence depends on writing single authored articles in academic journals, and the review process for that can be very generative and beneficial, but it also can be very much a disciplinary violent mechanism, as many of us know. And it really is, I'm experiencing as being very restrictive in terms of like, I would like to write a book, or yeah, something completely different, and I'm not able to for the next several years. But in terms of praxis, even say, okay, so if that's a fact that we have to sell yourself and a name in this right now, then there are people who get around that through a variety of methods where you say, well, we're going to write as a collective, or we're going to do multiple authored articles, or we're all going to write together, but we're going to put this grad student's name on the text because that person needs the points, because you get points for publishing. Or we're not going to write in an academic journal, and if I get fired, I get fired. You know, like there's also people who say, I'm going to do the work that I need to do, and if it means I get to stay, then I get to stay, and if I don't, then I'm going to leave. And maybe they have, you know, economic privilege in a way that allows them to do that, but still having that and then doing that helps make it possible for others who can't. But so I think, and then you also, part of the bigger approach with that is then saying, yeah, we don't only value writing, or we don't only value publishing in these outlets, or if you're having a conversation that also is generating knowledge, and then who are you talking to? Who's doing the most talking? Da, 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 da. But so I think praxis brings us back to both wiggling within the box that you put in, and then also trying to break that down as well. And you're doing both at the same time often. Yeah. So you talking about how it's not separate from your life, and part of it is living your life and making your life possible by living it. That idea very much relates to, yeah, theory not being separate. Yeah.
Just briefly, yeah, I very much concur with Zuleika and Jess. I think there is no step-by-step guide, because this is not process-based. It's not a managerial process. First do this and then do that. I think it's very much, we have to cultivate, using Zuleika's preferred term, cultivate organic, situational, and contextual knowledge, and then exchange those practices. And that makes it even more challenging, and sometimes even more tiring and exhausting because of that. Maybe that's not the best way to end.
No, it's perfect. Thank you. Also, in terms of capital, to go back to Moten and Harney's work again, I mean, they do have that specific phrase about the academy in which they say the only possible relationship to have with the university is the criminal one, right? In which they sort of like allude to using whatever position you have to steal from the university. So that could also be something to think about in terms of capital and who owns the capital, and when you don't have capital, and how you could possibly move through the university and building praxis. I don't know if Jess wanted to add to this, because I thought you had your finger up. No, okay.
Well, I was just going to say to what Nina said, part of the challenge is that the way the system works is by making just staying in it equal to all of the energy that you have. So a lot of trying to be in the university and not of it, and being in the university and not being of it, is about fighting that, which means taking away from the things that you're expected to do and paying the consequences. Yeah. So that's also not an inspiring note to end on, but.
I will save it. Shall I save it and give you something inspiring? So there is a very interesting article which I found really helpful in dealing with this, is called R Words, Refusing Research by Eve Tuck and Yang. They're also the authors of Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And in this article, it was super helpful because there are a list of questions that you can ask yourself, and in dealing with your complicity in the research process, right? Whether you're extracting knowledge. But one of the key things that I always take from that article is, what are we willing, or what research or what information are we not willing to give to the university? And the thing is, we are at a point where we're entering this institution with our eyes wide open. We know the beast that it is. And there's certain knowledge, there's collectives that we work with, there's people that we work with where the university doesn't deserve that knowledge.
I very much agree with what Zuleyka just said. I don't necessarily want to say something in response to that or add to that, but I wanted to at least answer one of the questions, because we had a small list of questions that you guys gathered. One of them, which I thought was very important to answer, so I want to, like 2 minutes, just go in on that. So a lot of questions were about how to navigate within an institution, how can you position yourselves, how can you choose your battles, etc. And I think we glossed over it. So people worry a lot about consequence of speaking out or speaking against, which I can very much understand from a position of student, first year PhD, etc. Are you going to put your living or life on the line, so to say, for what you stand for? My tip to that would be to know that you don't necessarily have to speak out immediately. I would say take some time to formulate a response. Not as long as the EUR came with the anti-racist statement, but take some time to think about your response. It's not necessary to immediately tackle a situation or immediately respond to something. Yeah, that's just the one thing that I wanted to say.
Melissa?
I haven't unmuted myself, sorry. So just in trying to add to what has already been said, and also just struggling with this question in general on a daily basis, also together with Isak. So we could, of course, cultivate, as Zuleyka and Zuhair already used the term, like different answers to this question. Because we are left with this, okay, but how to move like beyond this question and how to answer this question. And what I think could be sort of what we should be careful about is not seeing these answers as sort of recipes and then saying, okay, this is how we move forward and this is the answer to the question, because I think you already talked about how to reimagine the university, and I think that these imaginations should be imaginations and not like fixed answers. Because I do think that like fixating these imaginations or an otherwise or what the university could be, I think such a fixation could only just reduce our capacities to imagine an otherwise. So that's what I wanted to add.
And on that note, yeah, so it's worthwhile to try to stay away from having a program, but that doesn't mean that you can't cultivate a sensibility of when something feels messed up, it's probably messed up. And it's worthwhile to listen to that, because what the institution will do is every step of the way, it'll try to tell you not to listen to that or to doubt yourself or to question. And it's always worthwhile to think, okay, something happened there and I'm not sure what, and it's worth to reflect and also to have people that you can talk with and discuss with and think about it. And maybe at the end you say, well, nah, it wasn't that bad. I forgot to eat, I was tired, but often there's something there. And those are the moments when you really start to think, oh no, this is what I wanted it to be for. This is what should have happened. And in that sense, informal networks, yeah, also of fellow students, of colleagues, of people within and without of the university are really, really important, because you need sounding boards, and the institution individualizes or individuates, makes you isolates. And refusing that is part of how we find the way that we don't yet, the way to the place that we don't know yet. So, and that's something you can do every day just by checking in with people that you care about, or if you don't have them, trying to find them, and often they'll come even if they're not here right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jess. I mean, just to echo all your words, I mean, the answer is not one singular answer. And as all of us have alluded to, the answers have to emerge out of a collective kind of practice in which care is really important. So thank you all. I think we should maybe wrap it up because it's 7 p.m. I mean, I think we could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I would love to continue this conversation with all of you. But I think at some point we should wrap it up. So I want to thank everyone again. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you for your reflections and for your time and for being here. I also want to thank Zuleika for her beautiful poetry and her beautiful remarks as well. I want to thank all the other ASOG members, Alyssa, Melissa, Nia, Mero. Thank you. Also, thank you for people haven't seen it, but you were really instrumental during this event as well by engaging the chat and question and sending the questions. And Nia wants to say something. Go ahead, Nia.
I just read in the chat, Paula she asked a question, I guess, and we've missed that. So maybe real quick.
If Nina, Jess, and Giovanni and Zuleika still have time, we could do one more question, but that would be the last one. Only if you have time. If you don't have time, then we will wrap it up. So yes or no? Yeah. All right. Then is Paula gonna be unmuted, or is it a written question?
Hi, thanks. Yes, indeed. I would try to make it brief, but it's also like I was aiming to being able to participate a bit more in the meanings of. I had a very strong participation at the Outlighting Committee inside of the university. This is like the evaluation committee, which is part of what probably one of the commissions created for the quality agreements, which is the money that goes for the institutions. Now the university took granted like certain values. One of those is inclusivity and diversity. So the same as super diversity, this is being like two words that appearing everywhere in many weird situations. And I had a lot of insight about it. I'm from Chile. This is my second year here. I came as another European student dealing with many situations about, basically like the struggle to being able just to be here and make a research, which is already a lot, involvement with not enough care support from my university, which has been like one of the things that I've been struggling all the time and trying to reinforce myself in my participation there. Anyway, so much things there, but my questions is in regards of like many of the things that I'm involved with. It was about trying to get more insights about what are supposed to be the how to say, the measures, or like in which way these increasements of the tuition fee, which is something that was something voted by the parliament, is gonna occur, which are the possibilities in which the institution can apply and respond to that. Can they advocate inside of the institution to not increase this tuition fee? And many questions, I posed many questions inside of my role there. I only stepped with vague, very vague answers. And the most that I like wanted to have responses, people was like actually like just basically the whole structure was like very easily like seeing the failures, because actually they contradict themselves in the meanings that they say before they can do anything about it. And then they say like, yes, we just can do a little bit about. Of course, it's a big deal. We don't have much time, but my questions is about your affiliation with the university, within the knowledge and the power that you can have. How is it that you think that the universities and the academia in this case can also confront the macro structures of politics, the political? In this case, like, how is it that this increasement of the tuition fee is not but a fascist measure, which is basically not, and people tell me here that I should be aware of using this word. For me, it's very clear that it's a fascist measure, you know, because I know fascism, like in my skin, in my memory, and I know how it is applied. And people here in Europe is like very much like, I know that there's a culture that is being developed here differently in the meanings of how they acknowledge violence. But in my experience, I acknowledge violence in very specific ways. So I'm not afraid of using that word, because this is what I see, and that is what my body is being receiving. And with this measure, this is what I think is underneath of it. So my question is, how do you think that you can, in this case, be accomplice of politics of dealing with these laws and going, because I heard a lot about the inside of researchers, how do we deal with this? And trust me, I do care very much about the body and the politics that are in the daily life. But now I also need to think beyond the micro politics. How is it that there's some sort of engagement about to this kind of macro politics that are basically just closing the doors to non-European students and making more and more elitism and education here more available for rich people, which, if you don't know, like, it's like almost the 60% more that people from non-European countries will have to pay to come here to study. So what about those situations? How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to make it visible? How are we going to analyze? How are we going to post it there? How are we going to have conversations with the artistic leaders, with the management, with the boards? How are we going to do something about that? Thank you. I mean, I know we can really not say much about it, it's no time, but at least I'm being very like honest. It's been like a lot of insight for me to be here in this country dealing with many things about the how people deal with political issues. And I honestly have to say that much of it is based on rhetorics. And I really think that there is a moment in this need to stop. And I want to know about the implications.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you, Paula.
I think that's a very, very useful reality check there. And it's very confrontational, and I think we need to hear that. Actually, I don't have an answer to that, but I would like to add, it's when I listen to you, I sense that you have some ideas about that, because you've also been involved and you have more knowledge than I would. Do you have some ideas that you would like to share, what we should do?
Well, basically what I was trying to like articulate and speak about basically like pressure and influence, which is based on Thomas, you know, strikes. It could be like one of the translation for that, but action based on a student, based on a political body of the student in engagement with the staff. So like basically like a movement, you know, create movement inside the department, the programs inside of the schools, like, but it is something that also just like they are much more advanced than us, you know, in the meanings of the strategies. They have an agenda. When I say they, I think I am talking about conservative or protectionist parties that really don't want to like things move in the way they are being moving, and also like they're using the diversity and inclusivity discourse as it was before with the multiculturalism, just to create an image, just to say, hey, yes, we are a cosmopolitan city, we are a cosmopolitan country, we are accepting people to come in, but in a very high cost, in which is like, I don't know, filtrating a lot. And I think this is, okay, my thoughts are those. Activating movement inside is being difficult because people doesn't want to engage in that way, because also what I see is like, hey, but you know, that's the cliche, the revolution is not like that, you know, and I see this all the time. People think that because we talk about revolution, we are being naive. Like, this is what I found. And you know, like in my country, in Chile, now it was like a big uprising, which is everyone was diminishing, but basically it was about people getting to the streets. And it should be the street, or should be the building, or should be the program, but you need to create some sort of pressure, which is active pressure, which it doesn't mean that you don't do your homework, that you don't do the research, that you don't write the things that you need to write. You know, but if everything is going to stay in that way, then I don't think that we're going to get much advantage, or much possibility of changing much. But yeah, I would, for just an invitation, I would say, don't be afraid, if it's something that I could say, of using what could be like said as a cliche of something that once worked, because it's not going to be the same, you know. It's not going to be the same that it was like 20 to 30 years ago. People that can reinvent the ways, but already it is proved that there is being like a political pressure when people congregate, when people create a statement, manifest, when people create action and actually close the doors and say, hey, yes, we also know that we need to take some agency in these matters.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much for that wonderful reflection and also for the questions. If Jess and Giovanni want to respond quickly, then they could. It's a wonderful reflection and question. I wish we could have addressed it earlier, but considering the time, we should keep it a bit brief. So Jess and Gio, if you want to quickly respond, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually do have to go in a moment, but I just wanted to say that this issue, also the issue of replacing student funding with like loans or scholarships, also for Dutch students, and also visa issues, you know, because I know a lot of students and a lot of faculty face that as well, are things that maybe would be useful for their own event or their own conversation, because they're really important, and I don't know that we have the space here to address it. But there's a lot of that touches on a lot of things that I think touch really on a lot of people involved. So
true, and that's also where my thoughts were thinking of, Jess, when hearing this story, that they turned the student money into loans, actually within the Netherlands. It's one of my talking points that I've written down here on my second screen, but I think if I go into that, we'll be here until 8 o'clock. But that definitely could be one of the next topics to talk about, like this liberalization of the university and what it means for student funding, etc. I definitely have some strong ideas about that.
Yeah, and also precarization of labor. So temporary contracts, not paying for people's visas, things like that is really important.
It's a whole new webinar there. So Thank you, Paula.
100%. Thank you again. Thank you for everyone that was present today. Thank you for all the audience members. Thank you for the wonderful questions. Again, I want to thank Nina, Jess, and Gio for being here, for all your wonderful reflections and for the conversation. I want to thank Zuleika again for a poem, beautiful poetry and her remarks. Again, I want to thank all the other ASOC members, Alyssa, Melissa, Nia, Myrtle. And yeah, I don't know if Melissa wants to say something as well, but do keep an eye on our socials, and there will be more events like this. We just started it off with the university, but we do want to explore other institutions as well, like the art and culture institution, media, and many more institutions as well. So Melissa.
Yeah, just want to thank everyone who joined, like the speakers, but also you from your screens. And for the next 2 episodes, like Zuhair already said, we will be looking at people working within and against art institutions and media. But also, if you have any suggestions or ideas for next episodes, for the next episodes in this event series, then please contact us via Facebook, Instagram, and we'll also, Nia, if you can add our email address, that will be also great. We have recorded this lecture or event, and we will be sharing that on our socials as well. So hopefully we'll meet again soon, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you again, everyone. Take care. Melissa, if you could stop the recording.